the Jewish Channel's Week in Review. Jewish terrorism in the West Bank and domestic economic protests reached new levels of popularity in Israel. Jewish high school football, Joe Lieberman sits down with a home team crowd, and more of the Jewish news that's changing your world right now in this episode of the Week in Review. Hello and welcome to the Jewish Channel's Week in Review. I'm Stephen I. Weiss. While a United Nations vote on recognition of a Palestinian state looms in the coming weeks, it is news of the Israeli government's conflicts with Israelis that continues to make headlines. A mosque in the West Bank was torched on Monday by assailants assumed to be Israeli West Bank settlers. The arsonists broke the windows of the mosque's first floor and threw burning tires inside. According to Palestinian authorities, this is the sixth attack on a West Bank mosque in just the last 2 years. And while the attack is being described as a revenge attack, the revenge is not against Palestinian violence. The attack on the mosque is presumed to be a response to an Israeli government intervention against illegal Israeli settler outposts in the West Bank. Hours before the attack on the mosque, Israeli police had razed 3 illegal buildings in the outpost of Migron. At that event, 6 settler teenagers were arrested for throwing stones at Israeli police. The Israeli Supreme Court has ordered the state to dismantle the entire outpost of Migron, finding that it was built on private Palestinian lands. In another attack assumed to be related to the mosque arson, Israelis near the West Bank settlement of Yitzhar stoned Palestinian cars as they were passing by, causing damage and smashing several windows. But the Israeli government is also facing a challenge of peaceful protests, with hundreds of thousands of liberal Israelis continuing to turn out to protest the government's economic policies and asking for a return to government subsidy levels that existed a couple of decades ago. Rallies this past weekend were estimated to include as many as 450,000 people, which would easily make it the largest demonstration in Israel's history. If the same proportion of Americans turned out at a protest, it would consist of 19 million people. At the same time, protesters are beginning to dismantle the tent cities that have become a persistent symbol of the protests. The protest's initial core issue was housing availability, and these tent cities were meant to illustrate that. The dismantling of these tent cities is a declaration of victory, as organizers feel they've succeeded in getting their message across and that they'll continue to be able to draw large crowds to periodic protests. A separate domestic initiative that we reported on last week is the effort to end de facto segregation in Israeli public schools, where students from the Ethiopian community have become the overwhelming majority of students in some schools after what amounts to white flight from some neighborhoods in the Jewish state. The Education Ministry shut down 2 schools that developed overwhelming majorities of Ethiopian community students, promising to send those students to other schools with more even ethnic distributions. But when the school year started this past week, most of those students were at home, not at new schools. And more than a third of them had not even been assigned to new schools yet. Officials blamed the lack of placement on religious private schools, telling the newspaper Haaretz, quote, "Private schools do not absorb these children as well. The principals make problems over the few they do take." Meanwhile, when it comes to private Jewish schooling overall, the ultra-Orthodox Jewish community is now making headlines with its headlines. Bina magazine is a magazine for ultra-Orthodox Jewish women and surprised many this week with the cover story for its latest issue, carrying the cover headline, "Are we teaching our girls too much?" The article debates whether high school girls learning directly from texts is the best way to prepare them for lives of housekeeping. And while that's one topic one doesn't often expect to see addressed in Jewish schooling, another topic one doesn't often find in Jewish schooling discussions is tackle football. And yet, tackle football teams are a growing trend in Jewish private schools, with at least a handful of Jewish schools now having tackle football teams. In a first-ever event for West Coast Jewish schools, this game saw 2 Jewish schools face off in an 11-player exhibition game between the San Diego Jewish Academy Lions and the Milken Community High School Wildcats. The latter team is based in Los Angeles. San Diego won by a score of 25-8 in what was the Milken School's first-ever game for its brand-new football team. The schools dubbed the exhibition game the Bagel Bowl, while on the East Coast, 2 Florida Jewish schools compete annually in a game they've dubbed the Kiddush Cup. Of course, as anyone who's ever played for a Jewish school sports team can attest, there's a difference between having a Jewish school sports team and having a team that can actually beat general admission schools. But one school is making a significant investment in just that goal by hiring a former NBA All-Star to coach its boys basketball team. Kenny Anderson was the second overall draft pick in 1991, playing much of his career for the New Jersey Nets, and the rest for a combination of 8 teams. And now he's adding to his resume the position of head coach of the boys basketball team at the David Posnack Jewish Day School of Davie, Florida. The school has only 120 students, and the boys basketball team had a losing record of 10 wins and 11 losses last year. But while one Jewish day school is succeeding in NBA recruiting, recent attention has focused on Israel's successes in drawing NBA talent in light of the NBA owners' lockout of players. But Israel won't be getting its favorite basketball son back this year. Omri Kaspi, the first ever Israeli to play in the NBA, had been in negotiations to play with Maccabi Tel Aviv during the lockout. But in a news item that brings us full circle with our lead story discussion of Israeli economic policies, Kaspi announced on his Twitter feed that a deal would not be happening, saying the two sides met today and came to the understanding that the tax issues are too big. New reports suggest Kaspi may play in France during the lockout. And though Israel isn't getting its NBA export back, the Jewish state is receiving new support from artists here in the United States, as Christian Needham reports.
Supporters of both Israel and the arts turned out at the Industry City Gallery on the Brooklyn waterfront last week for the opening reception of a show sponsored by Artists for Israel. The Response Art Series, an experiment in politics, power, and pop culture, features works by 50 artists inspired by pro-Israel educational lectures they attended. The approach was proposed by the show's organizer, Cheryl Ehrman, who described her process for coming up with the sessions and the effect they had on the artists who attended.
I went to some advocacy groups like David's Project, Stand With Us, when Malcolm Homeline did a presentation that was from 92nd Street Y, and later a podcast with John Batchelor. And then we had Alex Grobman, who wrote a book about the Palestinians' right to Israel, and he is from the American-Israeli Friendship League. And anyway, we had 5 lectures, and all the artists were asked to come to the lectures and then to use the lecture message as inspiration to create the artwork. And it was a little bit difficult at first because a lot of artists did not want to present themselves politically, and they didn't want to put themselves out on the line, their career.
Artists for Israel President Craig Dershowitz described the content of the sessions.
Attendees went to lectures where they talked about the political ramifications of current events as well as the historical rights of Israel to the land and to other competing claims for that land. Then we also talked about general broad topic concerns that are equally, if not more important, such as human rights and Israel's right to exist as a sovereign nation within its own borders, the rights of the Jewish people to exist. And so really, it's been as complex and as simplistic as that broad spectrum.
Artist Richard McBee told the crowd how the sessions had inspired his depiction of the murders of 4 members of an Israeli family.
The painting I painted was a painting, I never conceived of painting until the organizer of this exhibition talked to me about the Fogel Massacre. The Fogel Massacre happened on March 12th of this year, in which 5 innocent Israelis were murdered in their home on Shabbos night. When we started to talk about it, it became clear to me there was no way I could not react to it by making a work of art. That's what all of these artists share. It's what all of these artists should be proud of.
Ehrman also described the Israeli inspiration for her own work in the show.
So when people say things like Israel doesn't have the right to exist, or Israel should give back the land to the Palestinians, I answered it with my paintings of the 3 kings of Israel, David, Solomon, and Herod. Who were they kings of? They were kings of Israel. So if people start to realize that Israel was here long before the Palestinians were the last 60 years, maybe people would feel differently.
One of those attendees who needed no convincing was the event's honorary host, former New York Mayor Ed Koch, who expressed why he so fervently supports Israel.
Not that I ever intend to go on Aliyah or consider myself an Israeli. I don't. I'm an American citizen. I love this country. I owe everything to it. It allowed me to rise, to be a congressman, to be the mayor of the international capital of the world. But I know that when the world was engaged in seeking to kill the Jews, led by Adolf Hitler, but he was not alone. He had friends out there. there were no nations, including our own here, willing to take all the Jews.
To see more from the Response Art Series and to hear more about Artists for Israel, please tune into the full broadcast edition of the Week in Review.
Thank you, Christian. Another prominent supporter of Israel is Senator Joseph Lieberman of Connecticut. Lieberman is best known for being the Democratic vice presidential candidate in 2000 and for turning to Orthodox Judaism in his adult life, as well as for distancing himself from the Democratic Party over the past decade. All of these items make him a perfect match for an Orthodox Jewish audience at Yeshiva University, as Rebecca Honig-Friedman found out.
Senator Joseph Lieberman of Connecticut packed the house at Yeshiva University's Lamport Auditorium last week, drawing a crowd of about 1,000 students and other community members for an intimate conversation with YU's Rabbi Dr. Meir Soloveitchik. Lieberman offered an optimistic note for the Orthodox students as they enter the real world.
What I want to say to the students is, based on my experience, my life, in this country, at this moment, and I believe throughout your lives, you will never have to choose between living a Torah-observant life, following halakha, and your secular professional career ambitions, no matter how high or what they are.
And that's despite a lack of knowledge about observant Judaism, something that Lieberman hopes to fix with his new book, The Gift of Rest, Rediscovering the Beauty of the Sabbath.
I think mostly people in the general society know what I don't do, what we don't do on Shabbat. I don't think they know what we do.
But Senator Lieberman also admitted that his motives went beyond simply describing Sabbath observance to the public.
I'm also trying to make a larger point here and trying in my own senatorial way to be makarav people who read the book, to bring them closer and in, both Jews and non-Jews, to come back to observance.
Senator Lieberman, whose daughter and sons-in-law are alumni of YU, seemed at home and at ease during the discussion, and at one point expressed his appreciation for an audience that understood his Jewish references, telling about an interaction he had with Sarah Palin, in which he shared with her a Dvar Torah from longtime YU Rosh Yeshiva Rabbi Joseph Soloveitchik, the author of The Lonely Man of Faith.
Right. This is what Rebbe Lichtenstein, I think, referred to as the episode of the lonely hockey mom of faith. This is one of the few rooms in America where I could say that and get a laugh. Right?
Sharing the rest of that anecdote, Lieberman explained he'd been asked by the McCain campaign to help prepare Palin for the vice presidential debate, and things weren't going well.
She was just off that day, and I could see that the McCain people were getting really nervous. So there's a guy named Steve Schmidt, who's one of the campaign managers, and he says, "Senator, you got to go in there and talk to her because you have something in common with her that none of us have." I said, "What's that, Steve?" "You're both religious. Go in there and pray with her." I said, "Well, I'll go in." So I wasn't going to pray with her because I hardly knew her, but so, it was like a second date, it was too. So anyway, I go in and say, "How are you?" And she said, "I'm having a bad day." And she was unhappy with people who were managing her campaign for Senator McCain, blah, blah, blah. And I said to her, I know you're a religious person and you're here for a reason. And then I said, I've just been reading a book. I fibbed a little bit there because I had read the book quite a while ago. But it was in my mind, because I had talked to her about destiny. Anyway, I spoke to her about, as Rav Soloveitchik does, about the covenant of fate and the covenant of destiny. Long story short, that the covenant of fate being what we are, the covenant of destiny, what we are to make of ourselves. And she was really quite taken with it, very responsive. And
she did pretty well in the debate, too. So
she did well in the debate, and I give all the credit to Rav Soloveitchik.
Excellent.
Excellent. For more from Senator Lieberman on balancing his religious observance with his public service, tune into the full broadcast version of The Week in Review.
That's all for this week. From all of us here at The Jewish Channel, be well. The Jewish Channel is available on cable. Time Warner Cable Channel 528, IO Optimum Channel 291, RCN Channel 268, Bright House Channel 330, Verizon Fios Channel 900, Cox Channel 1, Frontier Communications, and now on Comcast Cable in the on-demand menu under Premium Channels. For more information, visit tjctv.com.